My name is John McManus, and I'm privileged to be the host today of a program wherein we will interview two former citizens of the Soviet Union, Mr. and Mrs. Avraham Shifrin, who today are citizens of the nation of Israel, but who both came from the Soviet Union. First of all, Avraham Shifrin is a man who served in the Soviet Army during World War II. He then became a lawyer. He became a legal advisor in the contract division of the Ministry of Defense in Moscow. He was arrested in 1953, accused of being a spy for Israel and America, imprisoned for 10 years, and then 4 years of internal exile. Finally, in 1970, was permitted to leave the Soviet Union. He went to Israel and has become an authority on Soviet slave labor, Soviet prisons. While in Israel, he met his wife, Eleonora Shifrin. Eleonora was a teacher in the Soviet Union, an English language instructor. I believe she helped Avraham with his English. They are now Mr. and Mrs. Avraham Shifrin, have two lovely young children in Israel, and from time to time leave their home to come to America to speak to the American people wherever they can. And so we like to welcome both of you and ask you a little bit more about yourself, Avraham. Why was it that the Soviet authorities decided to imprison you?
My father was arrested in 1938 and died in concentration camps. When began the war, they sent me to penal battalion because I was son of the enemy of the people, so-called, in Soviet Union. And I came through 2 terms in penal battalion without any crime. I finished this war and with many decorations and so on. And I work in Ministry of Defense. I became active in Jewish national movement, so-called Zionist movement.
Within the Soviet Union?
With Soviet Union.
In the Soviet Union, there is no information whatsoever about Israel, about the Jewish history, Jewish religion, anything that concerns Jewish culture, history, or religion is absolutely unavailable. Therefore, when the State of Israel was organized in 1948, the Jews in the Soviet Union had no idea why it is a Jewish state, what it has to do with them.
Because we became a little more active, and KGB, Secret Service, they have heard about us, all of our friends were arrested one day. Because I worked in Ministry of War Equipment, they arrested me with pretext that I am American and Israeli spy.
I see. How about you, Mrs. Shifrin? Now, you got out of the Soviet Union.
I got out from the Soviet Union in 1972. Abraham said he was allowed to leave in 1970. He didn't say that he was one of the first 8 people whom the Soviets considered the leaders of the movement, and therefore they decided to get rid of them. They didn't know how vast the movement was by then. And they decided if they let out the leaders, there will remain no movement.
Why didn't they just kill him?
They were amazed at that time. There is somebody who is trying to educate the people around. And when these people were in the camps, because with those 8 people, most of them were former prisoners who were imprisoned in the first place for trying to educate the Jews. And the Soviets realized that while in the camps, they were educating the Jews in the camps. So they decided to get rid of them. But they didn't realize one thing. After the Jews in the Soviet Union saw that when you are active, you have a chance to get out, everybody became active.
Everybody became
That's how
active.
I became active.
That's how you became active.
Now, I was very lucky that I was allowed to immigrate in 1972. It was practically because the Soviets decided to get rid of me too, because I spoke English and I would speak on telephone to the people in the West to give information about what was going on in the Soviet Union. But the Soviets kept my family back there for 8 years. And all these years they were fighting there, trying to get out, and I was fighting here trying to get them out. And this all ended very tragically. My mother finally died on a hunger strike,
Oh, my.
and my sister committed suicide after that.
Oh, that's terrible. Since they have met in Israel, Abraham has set up a research center about what is happening in the Soviet Union in order to warn the West and in order to let the people in the West know what the Soviet Union really does and of its persecution campaigns against the Jews who want to leave and against the Christians who don't want to leave necessarily but simply want to practice their religion and are not being allowed to. Now,
And because we question thousands of newcomers from Soviet Union in our research center,
yes.
and because we have our underground contacts inside
Well, that's the
Soviet
important
Union.
thing. Now, we want to get into, Abraham and Eleonora have produced a film called Prison Land, and in this film they talk about what is actually going on, and they use smuggled film and interviews with people who are from the Soviet Union, and we're fortunate to have that film. And I think it would be a good time at this point in our program to simply show the film, but perhaps you might want to say something else about it before we get started with it.
I can tell only a few words. That first of all, it is common work of Christian and Jews in underground in Soviet Union. And they made it with very big risk of their life. And one of Jews was caught on this work. And you must understand that to be caught on such work, it means 10, 15 years imprisonment.
I'll bet.
And they did it with candid cameras inside Soviet Union. Candid cameras, we send them. And cartridges, we send them.
It's simple to say that we
Yeah,
sent them. It
it
was
is very-
several years'
It
work.
was not easy to do,
Yeah.
to get it in, or
and
to,
then to smuggle it
and
out.
to smuggle it
Yeah.
out. Well,
And when we got it, we were astonished.
well, what's important to also note here, and I want to mention this for the audience, is that these pictures that you're about to see are not pictures that occurred during the Stalin era in the 30s or
is
during the
today.
Khrushchev era. These are pictures that are current. Now, some of them as recent as when?
76, 78.
78, 79.
All right, and the name of the film is Prison Land, filmed actually, we could say, on location
Right?
in the Soviet Union in some of the prison camps.
Yeah.
Does the jumping and shaking of the picture make you feel uncomfortable? The man who made this film risked his life by doing it. He did it so that you might be able to take a small look into this huge land, the one that is being seen now for the first time. The USSR is said to be made of 15 republics, but there is a 16th, the Gulag Republic. Abraham Shifrin, manager of the Israeli Research Center for Soviet concentration camps, prisons, and exile, tells us about Gulag.
Одним из наиболее охраняемых секретов Советского Союза является количество...
One of the biggest secrets of the Soviet Union is the number of political prisoners, prisons, and camps. We have already collected about 700 precise locations of prisoners' concentrations across the USSR.
Этих мест концентрации заключенных в Советском Союзе. На этой карте...
We are able to draw a more complete picture from the map of the Krasnodarsk district, a resort area near the Black Sea, where we have counted 40 camps and prisons with about 30,000 prisoners.
30 000 заключенных.
Ari Vutka, 7 years in camps and prisons of the USSR, released in 1976.
Я провел там 7 лет.
He tells us of his own Gulag geography. My knowledge of Gulag comes from personal experience. I was arrested in 1969 and spent the first months of my imprisonment in the Ryazan prison, waiting for my trial. Then I was in concentration camps for political prisoners, first in Mordovia and later on in the Urals. While serving my term in the camps, I had to stand another trial, after which I was sent to Vladimir Central Prison for 3 years. This is known as the most dreadful prison in the Soviet Union. I also went through many other prisons, such as Kazan, Perm, Potma, Kirov, Kharkov, and Dnipropetrovsk. In the Soviet-occupied state of Latvia, Yakov Vroskin spent 3 years in a camp for criminals, although he was a political prisoner. From my own experience and the knowledge of others, there are about 20 camps around Latvia. Yakov Vroskin served his term in concentration camp OC 787 near Riga. Such camps exist not only in the remote areas of Siberia, but also in the center of the USSR, and even in Moscow itself. In this map of Moscow, you can see 14 prisons.
Мало кто знает, что на площади Дзержинского
Located in the central Dzerzhinsky Square is one of the biggest prisons of Moscow, Lubyanka, which occupies 2 huge buildings of the KGB, described by Solzhenitsyn and many other political prisoners.
гуляют ежедневно. Тюрьма это рассчитано
These 2 buildings and the area under the square hold thousands of prisoners. On the KGB headquarters building, you can see a wall without windows. This wall conceals a flat roof, which is divided into small walking yards by blank fences. The prisoners are taken there for a 30-minute walk each day. Hidden in each corner behind the walls are watchtowers with KGB soldiers armed with machine guns. This is in the very heart of Moscow.
Пресса Советского Союза еще в 1960
The Soviet press announced the liquidation of the Butyrskaya prison in 1962. If a tourist to the USSR bothers to go to the Savyolovsky railway station, he will be able to see the Butyrskaya prison, which is presently hidden behind newly built apartment buildings.
то там он увидит Бутырскую тюрьму, скрытую от
The prison makes up a small town of about 25 buildings.
Справа вы видите знаменитую Пугачевскую башню Бутырской тюрьмы. Это место ночных...
Here you can see the famous Pugachevskaya Tower. This is a place of night executions. I spent about half a year in this prison, and I still can hear the screams of prisoners being dragged off down the corridor to that place.
где по ночам раздаются... Много месяцев я провел в камерах и карцерах.
I have spent many months in the cells and punishment cells of the KGB investigation prison of Moscow,
Вы видите
Lefortovo.
следственный корпус Лефортовской тюрьмы слева, куда
On the right, you see the block of the prison where investigations are held. Prisoners are brought here constantly, back and forth, down that long, hanging corridor. The building on the left is the one containing punishment cells.
на переднем плане здание, где
I sat in one of those cells, or rather stood, for 29 days, in freezing cold, up to my ankles in water and mud.
просидел, а простоял в холоде, без кровати, без стула, почти...
If you will recall, this is the very prison from which Solzhenitsyn left for the West.
Тюрьма
Starvation is a common thing in all Soviet prisons. In the camps, the prisoners can eat grass to ward off scurvy. But in the prisons, they cannot do this. Vladimir prison was extremely congested when I was there in 1976. Each prisoner was entitled to 2.5 square meters of living space, but this was never a luxury we had. This is equal to the space required in a cemetery, according to Russian law. But our punishment cells were even smaller. With no space and no real movement, it becomes a living nightmare.
Пища совершенно несъедобная, и ее количество настолько мизерное, что люди находятся в состоянии истощения.
The food is unedible, and the quantity so small that most are starving. For what reasons are prisoners sent to this prison from the camps? My friend, Yosef Mendelevich, was sentenced to 3 years in Vladimir Central for observing the Sabbath in his camp. I was sent there for keeping the Jewish traditions of wearing a kippah, or skull cap, and having a beard. Yosef Meshiner, 6 years of forced labor in concentration camps, released in 1976. Forced labor is one of the so-called re-education methods used on political prisoners in the USSR. In the prison where I was, we would work in the same cells where we lived and slept.
Будучи политзаключенным,
As a political prisoner, I worked in a woodworking plant in Chuna with about 2,000 others. We handled each one of these logs without any machinery as we rolled them for about a mile to the plant. Gregory Berman, 3 years in criminal camps for the desire to immigrate to Israel. Life in the Soviet concentration camps resembles that of Hitler's. Conditions are so bad that some have thrown themselves onto electric fences in an attempt to end their lives. Simeon Wolfman, a former convoy soldier, told us that once a prisoner named Sirioja, desperate after serving 15 guiltless years, came up to his watchtower and cut off his hand. Within the last few years, the regime in the camps has become even more strict, and conditions have worsened since the Helsinki Agreement. On these barred lorries, accompanied by guards and dogs, we were taken about 20 miles to work. We couldn't breathe for lack of space. This is lorry 42. The hands you see behind the bars might be my own, since I was usually taken to work in this truck and was in this camp when this film was made in 1975. This is our Voronok, or Black Raven, used for transporting prisoners from one prison to another for interrogation. These trucks, as described by Solzhenitsyn, bear signs of milk or meat, but actually carry people. Many times during my 6 years' experience in prisons and camps, I was transported in a Voronok. It was usually stuffed with 30 to 40 prisoners who were squeezed together with their baggage on their heads. Exhaust gases made some vomit and faint. I have seen with my own eyes several people die after such a trip.
чудом выживший бывший политзаключенный из Советского
A
Союза.
former political prisoner who survived imprisonment brought these pictures and told us, on these boats, prisoners were moved down the Yenisei River to the polar regions and were caught by winter on the way. The river froze and the entire area was covered with snow. The people were unloaded without warm clothes or food or tools and made to build themselves a settlement out of these huts. They spent the winter there, and 3,000 of the 6,000 died. Their corpses left unburied. The arbitrary practices of the KGB and their personnel are still more frightening in the psych prisons. Here is one of them, Oriol. People are thrown here for mere differences of opinion with the authorities.
Если в обычных тюрьмах политзаключенных избивают не так часто, не слишком часто.
In a regular prison, political prisoners are not beaten too often. But in a psychic prison, it is regular and frequent. A person ceases to be treated like a human being. He is regarded as a madman and without any rights. Here reigns the tyranny of cruel orderlies recruited from criminals, sadistic doctors, and nurses. The main form of torture is injections that cause not only intense pain, but mental crippling as well. One of the most dreadful and well-known psych prisons is Igren, in Dnepropetrovsk district. I was born in that area and heard about it since my childhood, and had always been told it was a mental hospital. I could never have guessed that behind those secret walls were kept a great number of ordinary people, political prisoners. It is an everyday occurrence that those who do not agree with official ideology are considered mad.
Иностранные граждане пользуются...
Foreigners have the same treatment from the KGB. They too can be and are sent to the concentration camps.
Советские концлагеря.
You can see me here in this picture with a cane, along with the German Gerhard Schmidt and the Frenchman Ivor Colel. Here are my campmates, Henri Gewurz of France and Cozy from Spain. American Lieutenant Alexander Sharnik, who served 10 years in a camp with me. The Roman Cardinal Joseph Slippy, a Ukrainian freedom fighter, 16 years in camp. Anton Paipe, A Flemish student came to the Soviet Union with human rights leaflets based on the Helsinki Agreement, sentenced to 5 years in April 1977. This long list of names of foreigners are those who came to Russia to see communism firsthand and were later sent to concentration camps. I'm a Zionist and was sent to prisons and camps with my brothers, Jews who tried to go to Israel. There are people of many other nationalities in the political prisons of Soviet Russia. Valentin Moroz, a Ukrainian freedom fighter, has already served over 10 years and has another 5 to go. Mikhail Sorako, a Ukrainian nationalist, died after 23 years of imprisonment. Baltic republics are also fighting for their independence. Nationalists from Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are being kept in camps, and these people are not criminals or terrorists. Suffering alongside them in the camps are over 100,000 religious believers. The facts refute official Soviet propaganda concerning the freedom of practicing one's faith. Tens of thousands of synagogues, churches, and praying houses are closed or destroyed, most of them in the last few years. Look at this Baptist praying house in ruins. A quotation from the Bible is fixed upon it. They hated me without a cause. All this is not due to the arbitrariness of local authorities, but is a general policy approved and adopted by the Soviet government. There is an official declaration directing the confiscation and burning of the Holy Bible as anti-Soviet literature. A Catholic priest, Zavata, was arrested and imprisoned for refusing to divulge confessions to the KGB. Religious people who want to pray without being spied upon by the KGB have to gather secretly in forests or in other places. The militia and KGB agents in civilian clothes look for such places like Volsk, and when they find them, they disperse the crowds by beating them, dragging them to militia vans, or by opening fire upon them. This boy, Loika Nikolay, was wounded in Mogilov during one of these raids. He had only wanted to pray to God. He was wounded by Captain Lukyanov, whose ID card was stolen from his pocket during the raid. Soviet courts helped the KGB to pass through lawless sentences and to send innocent people to the camps. Sentences are prepared beforehand by the KGB and approved by the party. This is the Supreme Court of Estonia, Communist Russian Judge Afanasyev, and Estonia prosecuting attorney Kumel. This is a political trial in the Supreme Court of Latvia. All these pictures were made with a hidden camera in the audience. The KGB uses modern equipment for detection and persecution. The Baptist preacher, Georgy Vins, was arrested after his sermon was taped with the help of American microphones bought by the KGB. Major Ageyev is infamous all over Dubrovlag for his sadism. Prisoners say that he cannot sleep if he hasn't sent 1 or 2 of them to punishment cells. Solzhenitsyn alone told the world about 60 million prisoners killed during 60 recent years of the Soviet regime. He literally pointed to the many snowy graves of the far north areas like Vorkuta, Pechora, and Kolyma. Prisoner Petrenko finished his term in the camp, but it doesn't mean freedom for him. He has to go into exile. Baptist Saladyankin is now in Siberian exile after having served 25 years in the camp for his faith. Reza Palatnik spent 2 years in special camps for women. Women of the world are fighting for their equal rights. Soviet women are equal to men according to the Soviet Constitution, and they are equalized to such an extent that they are kept in the same conditions of imprisonment as men. Brutality, rudeness, humiliation, and 12-hour working days are the standards for women as well as men. On the island of Shikuatan, in their forced labor camp, 6,000 women prisoners produce red caviar for export. Not far from the center of Odessa, in the street Chernomorskaya Doroga, you can see these walls with barbed wire and searchlights and buildings of a concentration camp for women. About 2,000 women who work as slaves are kept here. They are punished here with starvation for minor faults. Here, along with others, suffer mothers with babies. There is a camp in Odessa for women with children who were born in prison or came there as babies. In these pictures, you see children in clothes sewn by their mothers from remnants in the cloth factories. They look like prisoners from especially strict camps. Nadia Shumak, arrested with her husband for Ukrainian nationalism, had her child taken from her and sent to a children's camp. Uri Shukhevitz, as a child, was in a camp for children because he was the son of a Ukrainian general. Now he is serving another 10 years, and his baby is in a children's camp. You might be able to find those children in this picture.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the situation. And generally speaking, we in America are not permitted to know that this is the case. We have gone through an era of détente with the Soviet Union, that the Soviet Union is mellowing and so forth. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Now, I know that Avraham has some comments that he'd like to make about the film, which was made several years ago, and at the research center that he runs in Israel about this situation, they have come upon a great deal more information. So, Avraham, what is it about the film that you'd like to update?
First of all, in film I speak about 700 concentration camps. Now we have another map with 2,500 concentration camps. And we published guidebook to these concentration camps with exactly information about these 2,500 concentration camps. This film, these pictures and this map looks incredible. This figure looks incredible. 2,500 concentration camps.
In the whole Nazi Germany, there were 35 concentration
35 camps. So, in your
when
view...
you speak about 2,500 camps, it's hard to imagine.
Well, and this is very significant. Here you are, both Russian Jews, now living in Israel, and you're telling us that the Soviet Union is a much greater criminal than Nazi Germany ever was.
This is the point.
100%. Now, I told in the film about 6 extermination camps in Soviet Union. Now we have addresses of 43 extermination camps.
Now, by extermination camps, you mean places that are not prisons where people are kept for slave labor purposes, but places where people are brought for the purpose of killing them.
No.
No?
They are more cunning than Germans, than Nazi. They sent prisoners to dig uranium in uranium mines. And in uranium mines they work without protective clothes, without mask against gases, and it means deaths in 6-7 months.
They tell the prisoner, you are sentenced to 5 years. If you work well, if you fulfill your quota more than 100%, you will serve only half of your term. And the man believes he will be free, therefore he tries to work well. And after 6-7 months, they die.
They die. Wonderful.
Now, I must tell you also some corrections about fate of peoples in this film.
But we didn't say that in such extermination camps, they annihilate over 200,000 people every year.
Each year,
Each
Yeah.
year.
200,000.
200,000 people die in this camp. And what we must tell, that these camps exist.
And it's also very important to say that we continue to get additional information. We speak now about the latest map with 2,500 camps,
Yes.
but we continue to get new and new addresses every day.
Yeah.
And if you look at the map, you will see that there are almost empty areas. We don't show almost any camps in those areas. This is only because we don't have enough information about those areas.
In my presence, soldier, guard of KGB, asked prisoner, why you are here? Why they arrested you? And prisoner answered, I am innocent. I didn't do nothing. And guard tell, and how many years did you get with your sentence? Prisoners answered, 25 years. And guard told in full voice, you are a liar. For nothing they gave only 10 years.
Why have you brought this information to America? What is there that the American people can do about this situation?
In short, I will tell you, and then I will explain you why I tell it. In short, they now on the edge of new invasion to Europe.
The Soviet Union.
Soviet Union with conventional weapons, not with atomic weapons. They prepare now invasion to Europe.
Which part of Europe?
We
We
believe
believe it will be Sweden. They prepare Sweden with new campaign.
I remember-
It's better to be red than dead.
I remember recently reading about a Soviet submarine in the
Yeah.
harbor.
It's all connected.
It is all connected.
And I will remind you that academician Sakharov, few months ago, it is so brave man, sent letter to Mr. Reagan to tell him that if you will not put your Pershings in Europe, it will be war in few months.
All right.
And we are glad that you put these Pershings. You postpone this war.
Postpone the war.
Yeah,
right.
but now I will show you this map of little part of Soviet Union, Estonia. They fool this Estonia with weapons now, with conventional weapons.
And this, of course, is right across the water, in the Baltic Sea.
Across the Sweden.
Yeah.
And they only wait one day when it will be the day of the invasion. And because they prepare this war.
Not only Estonia, we have
Oh,
the
yeah.
map of Estonia, but we know that they concentrate weapons in Latvia, Lithuania, and Ukraine too.
Now, when they prepare this war against Sweden, they began new massive wave of arrests in Soviet Union. It is situation today. Mass arrest in Soviet Union. For each pretext, they put in the flats of dissidents drugs, pistols. They don't wait that someone will do something against them. They arrest people for anti-Soviet jokes.
Or simply because they know about somebody that he is a dissident. In previous years, they allowed certain liberalization, and therefore those who are capable of free thinking, of organizing something, raised his head.
I see.
And therefore
So-
now they know all their enemies inside.
Well, you're
and they
saying
arrest them.
that things are getting worse in the Soviet
Yeah,
Union.
they
right?
shot Christian priests.
They shoot Christian
Yeah,
priests.
they kill them with the axes in the night in their houses. They don't permit to prisoners which finish their term in concentration camp to go out from the camp.
In many, many cases, they give additional term right inside the camp.
Right.
Now they closed this zone where they concentrate weapons around the borders.
Here on the map.
They closed a 60-mile zone, and Soviet citizens are not allowed to enter this zone.
So the war preparations are leading to increasing terror for the people in the
Right.
Soviet Union
because
itself.
they are terribly afraid of internal uprisings if they start the war. They know that they have very strong nationalist movements.
Let me mention, if I may, that for many years we in America have been told that we should be careful about Soviet arms and that we should worry about the possibility of Soviet invasions and so forth. And yet people that I respect in the anti-communist movement have said all along that the last thing on earth that would really happen is an all-out land war involving the West with the Soviet Union, that there would be piecemeal ventures, as you're suggesting here in Sweden, because if the Soviet Union were engaged in all-out warfare, there would be tremendous uprisings within the Soviet Union.
Absolutely
Yeah.
correct. The Soviets know better than anybody else that they are absolutely unable to withstand a real military confrontation.
Well, that's an extremely important point. So
And-
the danger for America is not Soviet military might as much as it is
Absolutely right.
Political might, I would say.
subversion from
Yes.
within.
Now, Jack, you must understand here that they try to frighten you with atomic weapons and the strength of their army. And they are not only so strong, they are very weak.
Yes.
Now I will give you real examples. Because I was chief legal advisor in Ministry of War Equipment, I have there many contacts. When I was in prisons, my friends became very
Made big career.
big career in war industry. And I have now these contacts because you must understand that people in Soviet Union, they hate this regime. They told me that their war equipment is so bad that they cannot work without American equipment, computers, know-how, guidance systems. We got letters from laser laboratory that in one and a half year they will collapse with laser weapons if they will not have your know-how and equipment.
So they can't do what they're doing in any technology without American
Absolutely,
equipment.
and we get such testimonies from practically all branches of Soviet industry and sciences.
Well, there's something the American people can do.
Now,
Exactly.
that is your
That's why we
message.
say that this is directly connected with you.
yeah,
Yes.
They are building weapons against you. They give all their economical power to building weapons. They have absolutely disastrous economical situation inside the country. People are hungry.
we got information from testing field in which they test rockets that they have piles of disrupted rockets in this testing field because maybe one from 100 of rockets go to the target. It is their statistic, not ours. They send us such information from Soviet Union. We will not have possibility to find, many years we will not have possibility to find Washington with our rockets. And then we got from you, we were astonished. From America we got absolutely new guidance system.
The most sophisticated guidance systems.
And now with this guidance system, we can find White House in Washington. And we asked your officials in Washington, really it was fact that you sent guidance system? And we got answer from Pentagon that they really sent guidance system in the days when it was American and Soviet rockets meet in the skies. It was only show. And for
Cosmic
this show, they asked this guidance system from Soviet Union, and you were so stupid, excuse me,
Stupid, maybe.
to send them this guidance system.
Well, let me summarize this. Now, several years ago, there was a link-up in space. Americans and the Soviets met in space capsules. In
Yeah.
order for the Soviets to be able to do that,
Yeah.
they had to get American guidance systems
Yeah.
and American equipment, which they are now able to use for weaponry. And that's
Absolutely
what you're
correct.
saying.
Yeah,
That's what you're saying.
absolutely
correct.
correct.
And of course, we are told all the time here in our country that things like the link-up in space will lead to peace.
They brought now their atomic rockets to Nicaragua. Your media explained you that they brought it for self-defense.
Self-defense, of course. It's always
When they
defense.
brought bombers to Nicaragua, they also pronounced that these biggest airfields in Nicaragua,
Four
they
big
built
airfields.
four big airfields for self-defense.
Self-defense.
Children know that bombers they need for attack.
Now, let me go on here a second and ask you about something that you mentioned during one of the breaks, and that is the new surge of activity against Soviet Jewry.
Yes.
We are, of course, in America beset with the problem that anybody who intends to be an anti-communist and is really an anti-communist is accused of anti-Semitism, it seems from what you've told me that the greatest anti-Semites in the entire world are the Soviet Union.
Exactly. Therefore, when they accuse some organization in the United States of being anti-Semitic, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, because they couldn't care less about somebody being anti-Semitic. They encourage anti-Semitism all over the
They
world.
send to anti-Semitic organizations money.
There were
Here in
cases,
America?
Here in America
The
also.
Soviet Union sends
Yes.
Soviet
money
Union.
fostering
in Europe,
anti-Semitism.
Yes.
in
And
Europe, with their money, they make fascist crosses.
During this last decade, there were several cases when in different countries at the same time somebody started desecrating Jewish cemeteries.
And
And the
synagogues.
signs
Yeah.
painted on those
Swastikas.
yes,
Swastika.
I've
they
seen
were
pictures
made
of
in
it.
the same style. And then it was traced. The orders came from Soviet embassies. It was organized in Moscow, and the orders came directly from there.
Скажи о большой
So,
волне
what the
новых.
Soviets are doing, they are persecuting their own Jews, trying to blame somebody else. You might have heard that there was always anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
But even compared to all the previous years, what they are having today is absolutely unprecedented. The campaign against the Jews is so strong now that in 1984 alone, within 1 year, which is not over yet, they have published more anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli publications, articles, pamphlets, radio and TV shows, more than in all the previous 66 years.
In Soviet Union, the biggest anti-Semitic country, biggest anti-Jewish propaganda, which they made it now, in the same time they blame all real communist
Anti-communist.
anti-communist organizations in the world. They blame that they are anti-Jewish because they want to divorce these anti-communist, to separate these anti-communist organizations from Jews in all the world. They know that Jews is political power in America, and they want to divorce, to divide, for example, John Birch Society,
John Birch Society,
from
yes.
Jews. And that's why each week, each day, you have found in Soviet newspapers anti-Birch propaganda, and in this propaganda they explain that you are biggest anti-Semites, anti-Jewish enemies.
Meaning the John Birch Society.
Yeah.
Right. That's very interesting. Now,
When we came to United States, and when we met with John Birch Society first time, and when we found that in John Birch Society we see many Jewish members,
yes.
and some rabbis participate in your work, and we understood that you are on the side of Israel, on the side of Jewish fight for Soviet Jewry, and you published many materials in support of Jews, we began to work with you. We came through now only in this
We were
month. too.
amazed to see during the days of war in Lebanon that the Birch Society publications, the review of the news, was the only probably publication in the United States that gave correct information on why this Israeli war in Lebanon was anti-communist war.
Yes.
Why Israel had to fight this war in order to prevent communist intervention in the Middle East.
So part of your message.
Now, yeah, you are right. And our message and our goal to unite all anti-communist power in United States and in all the world in struggle for boycott, which we must make against Soviet Union.
Stop helping the Soviet
Stop
Union.
helping
Yeah.
the Soviet Union, because we strongly believe that this is the only way for all separate groups that are fighting to help some separate groups inside the Soviet Union.
Yes.
The only way to win is to put the Soviet government on the knees economically.
And we could do that if the West would stop sustaining them.
Absolutely.
To stop
Especially the United
to
States.
stop artificial armament, to stop artificial competition with Soviet Union. When you build your armament and in the same time you build armament of your enemy,
Right now, the Soviet Union is conducting a campaign of domination of one of its neighbors, the country of Afghanistan. and there have been many reports about what has been going on there, but perhaps you have some information that you'd like to share with the American people about that situation.
The Soviets have lost by now in Afghanistan over some 70,000 soldiers.
70,000 casualties.
Because they are having unexpected resistance in Afghanistan. They invaded Afghanistan because they thought they would get for free Afghanian ships.
Oh.
And they need meat for their own population. And they didn't think that Afghanians would resist. And Afghanians don't have the European or American style of media, therefore they did not forget that peace does not mean surrender. They know how precious freedom is, and they
have not been brainwashed like
exactly.
other people have.
Therefore, the Soviets burn with napalm entire villages, thousands and thousands of people.
Just a campaign of extermination.
And it is going on with American help, with American equipment, with American...
Give me some specifics on that.
Okay, just one of many examples. American-built Mack truck.
Mack trucks.
Plant. It is the biggest plant in the world now producing trucks.
Where is the plant?
Kama River.
And you say this is American-built?
It was built by American engineers, and the manpower that was used on the construction was Soviet prisoners. Now, they produce in this plant half tanks.
Oh, half
of the plant produces tanks.
And the tanks
so now your trucks and your tanks fight in Afghanistan.
Are being used to suppress the freedom of the people in Afghanistan.
Yes. Now, the Soviets spend in Afghanistan every year $1 billion, approximately. The Soviet bloc countries owe you over $85 billion, which means that you, in fact, finance this campaign. If you demanded from the Soviets to pay back their debts, they would have no money to invade Afghanistan.
It's very easy to make a case that the United States should never have loaned money to the communists in the first place.
Right, and the United States should never build military and other heavy industry in the USSR, because all heavy industry in the USSR was built by American businessmen.
So your solution to this thing is to just stop all contacts?
Absolutely, because you see, whatever deals you have with the Soviets, you always pay for those deals.
We always pay for them.
You always do, because for example, loans. In all history of Soviet-American economical relations, it never happened that the Soviets paid back a single loan. Why those bankers who give the loans to the Soviets continue to give?
Well,
because
we found out why. Because if the communists default on the loans, then the government of the United States pays it as they did in Poland.
This is the point.
Yeah.
What does it mean that the government pays? You pay, the taxpayers pay.
The taxpayers, exactly.
Therefore, they have to raise your taxes all the time.
Well, now, perhaps you can answer this question. I've heard this often. Somebody says, well, if America doesn't sell it to the Soviet Union, then somebody else will, and we might as well get the money.
You know,
you are first.
The European allies of the United States, NATO countries, must know that they can rely on your support in case of Soviet invasion. But they have seen in previous years that you have betrayed so many of your allies that they now know they can hardly rely on you.
Yeah.
Therefore, they are trying to save themselves. And therefore, they are offering a pistol to a knife, to a criminal who is having a knife and threatening to kill them. They say, please take my pistol, but don't kill me.
But you're saying that America could be a leader in putting a stop to financing the Soviet Union.
If America is really determined in putting the Soviet government on the knees by economical boycott, if your European allies will see that you are strong and they can rely on your support, then they will join you in boycotting the Soviet Union too.
We're being told in America that the Soviet Union are bad, they're bad communists, but now, finally, and thank goodness, the Chinese communists are the good communists, and our government has already embarked on a program of great openings in trade and negotiations and so forth.
Biggest mistake.
Big mistake.
Biggest mistake.
I even read in one of your newspapers that the Chinese now realize that communism is bad and they're starting now to change their economy.
What do you think of that?
It is deliberately cheating of America, because these two gangs of killers, China and Soviet Union, they can unite in one night, and then they will go against you with your equipment and your weapons, which you send now also to China.
Well,
And
they
excuse me,
split-
please.
The Soviet Union and China have split only in order to cheat you and to get your help separately, one by one, pretending that they are enemies,
So-
while in fact they are not.
so a
No,
communist
Jack-
is a communist
Jack,
is a
maybe-
communist, and they're all the same.
Jack, maybe you will answer on my question. Why it is now 100 meters from Moscow Kremlin, it is new skyscraper Chase Manhattan Band.
I should answer that?
Yeah,
I'd rather you ask David Rockefeller.
Exactly.
I know that he also
the
has a
Soviet
bank in
people are-
Peking.
Oh, you see?
Yeah.
They
Now-
have common business. David Rockefeller with Peking, with Moscow, and let me tell you, it is not for Soviet
Well, let
people.
me
Soviet
tell
people
you-
have no right to enter this building.
Let me tell you the most common question we get in America when we mention the fact that David Rockefeller and other so-called capitalists are engaging in this. They say, well, that really can't be because they have the most to lose.
I believe the reason they do this is that the human nature is such that men must want something. And the people like David Rockefeller and other multi-billionaires have everything you can think of except for one thing: power over the whole world.
So the whole thing is just a power grab. It's not an
because
ideology.
I believe so.
They have enough money.
I agree emphatically. Well, when anybody has a lot of information, as you have heard from these two people, they are able to prognosticate about what might happen in the future. And I know Mrs. Schifrin is itching to tell us what she thinks might be the situation in Europe in a very short time.
You see, we don't want to give wrong prognostications, but judging by what is going on in the Soviet Union today, we are afraid this invasion may happen very soon.
The invasion of Sweden.
Why we why we believe so? Because you know how dangerous it is for people in the Soviet Union to speak with the West on telephone, and they are usually very cautious when they speak about what they say. In recent telephone conversations, the Jews shouted to us openly, they are on the edge of final solution. They are preparing final solution for us. Do something, save us, it will be late. This shows to us that they are going to do away with the Jews in order to start war very soon.
The John Birch Society has sponsored you throughout the United States. The last time you were here in America, you met with the chairman of the John Birch Society, who at the time was Dr. Larry McDonald, the congressman from Georgia, who was, of course, one of the victims of the shooting down of the Korean airliner. And it would be of interest to know if you have any information about that incident.
Yeah, we try to investigate it from first seconds when it's happened. And we have heard conversations of Soviet pilots on radio.
The actual pilots
Yeah,
during
actual
their
pilots.
It was
conversations.
reported, and it was many times given on the news.
Well, it was also reported here, but it wasn't highlighted.
But
Right.
we
But
understand
it-
Russian.
We understand Russian, and you were offered a translation.
All right,
We
what-
don't know
all
what
right.
you were offered,
Well,
but
what-
we heard the real conversation.
What can you tell us?
And the conversations showed to us that the plane was accompanied by Soviet planes for 2 hours because the pilot kept silence. When the pilot of Korean pilot started communicating with the base, he said the number of his flight. And then the Soviets knew the number. They immediately reported to their base on Sakhalin. Fighters came from Sakhalin. The fighter that came from Sakhalin said, I see the target. All the lights are on. The Soviets, if you remember, claimed that the plane was going with lights
Without
off,
lights.
Yes.
that it was on spying mission.
Yes.
But the Russian said, I see the plane. It waves its wings,
Which
showing
is-
that he sees him.
Yes.
All the lights are on, and then he got the command, fire. And he said, I see the target, I shot, I hit the target.
Well, you're suggesting that this was a deliberate attempt
We
to...
have no
Absolutely.
doubts.
You have no
Their
doubt.
aim
No doubt.
was to find out which was this plane. They knew that there were 2 planes following approximately the same route. And they wanted to make sure that this was this plane on which Larry McDonald was, because he was their target. They tried to get rid of him, first of all. There had been previous attempts in his life, unsuccessful.
Because he was so big enemy of Soviet Union with such knowledge.
He was in the unique position of a U.S. congressman and chairman of the Birch Society. He possessed the knowledge of the communist conspiracy.
It is time to mention that in Soviet Union we found 4 concentration camps, very secret, in which they have only foreigners.
Foreigners,
Only.
not Soviet people.
Not Soviet
Russian
people,
people.
only
Camps for
special for
foreigners.
foreigners.
Any Americans there?
And
Yes.
now we know that there is 53 Americans
At least.
because we were invited to State Department, and head of Russian Department in State Department asked our research center to investigate fate of 53 disappeared in Soviet Union Americans. And then we met with a committee of relatives of Vietnam POWA.
Missing.
Yeah,
Yes,
missing people.
officers
And
from
they
Vietnam.
told that many of them disappeared in China and in Soviet Union.
There are 2,500 unaccounted for.
And the State Department does not talk about those people.
No.
The chairman of this committee of relatives told us the State Department does not even want to meet with these people.
Well, okay, what can an American citizen do?
First of all, you must remember that all people in the world, in Afghanistan, in
Nicaragua.
hungry uprisings in Soviet Union,
Rebels in Nicaragua
in suicidal uprisings in concentration camps. These people which struggle in Nicaragua
against Sandinistas.
against Sandinista, they all struggle not only for their fate, also for your fate.
Yes, absolutely.
If you will not participate in this struggle, it will be finished for you.
All right,
Because then
how does an
one day you will
American
have to
citizen
fight
do
in
it?
your territory. Now, you are free people. You can elect. And final decisions in your country are being made by Congress. And you elect your congressman. Therefore, every American must make sure that his congressman knows exactly what his constituents want him to do in Washington. You go to elect once in 2 years, and you believe this man will, within the next 2 years, he will do whatever I want him to do.
Not always
But you
so.
don't check
Keep
what
check
he's
on him.
doing. Keep check on him and keep telling him what you want him to do. You must make your voice heard.
When you say you, you're referring not to me, but to
We are
our
referring
organization.
to-
No,
If we are
maybe
referring-
to your organization.
But to your organization maybe in the first place, because you are the most organized group of concerned Americans. You are a group of people who understand where the danger is coming from. Therefore, you are responsible for showing example to other concerned Americans.
Because you try to educate people. It is your goal. Educate people what means communism.
We want the Birchers, as well as everybody else who is concerned in this country, to realize that we are fighting a war against the Soviets. They are using non-conventional weapons against you, subversion and propaganda. And you must realize this, and you must counteract
Well,
it.
we certainly do know it. Now, how to counteract it, of course, is
You
is
see,
something.
Jack, when you speak-
We've only got 1 minute to go here.
Yeah, when you speak about activity, I will give you an example. 2 days ago, John Birch Society in the city Atlanta came with their placards to Jewish demonstration
In support of Soviet
in
Jewry.
support of Soviet Jewry. It is
Wouldn't that be something that a
It
lot
is
of American
active-
Jews would be surprised to hear?
They
Yeah.
would be surprised, but when they hear this, they will have to think that they were cheated by your media.
So the Jewish people in America do not have an enemy in the John Birch Society, but have
They
a
have a
very,
friend, an
very
ally.
strong friend.
Yes.
Right? And your testimony is very, very important in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, let's close the program by inviting anybody who is listening to look into the John Birch Society more deeply. And that, of course, can be done by contacting us at our headquarters in Belmont, Massachusetts. We'll be delighted to hear from you. We certainly thank Abraham and Eleonora Schifrin. We wish you well with your research center about the activities in the Soviet Union. And we look forward to having you back to America soon again for another speaking tour to meet more of our people and more of the members of the John Birch
It is
Society.
hard.
Thank
It is hard to believe
I
that
should
we will
mention
be
they
so-
have 2 small children in Israel, and it's difficult for them to leave for several months. But we do appreciate it. We thank you very much. And of course, to all of you in the audience, we thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.